Hi Year 8, this is Mrs. Hudson. We've just been through these 5 questions and I'm going to talk you through the rest of the lesson now. So the title of our lesson is Did Mary Queen of Scots Deserve to be Executed? And the outcome of this series of lessons is we will be able to analyse the reason for Mary Queen of Scots' execution and whether they were justified by looking at a historical interpretation. Okay, so we've got Elizabeth I on the left-hand side up here and Mary Queen of Scots, her cousin, on the right-hand side. And one of the key words that we're going to be looking at today is this one down here in the yellow box. Treason means disloyalty or treachery to one's country or its government, often to overthrow the government. So in this case here, we're looking at someone trying to overthrow, possibly kill, Elizabeth I. So we're going to look at some plots today. So last lesson you should have completed this task here. This is the interpretation we're going to be using later in the lesson. You needed to go through and write down any tricky words and use the internet to find the definition of them. That should have been completed last lesson. If not, you must complete that now. So this is a sheet that you're going to be working on today. There's slightly more details on the next slide in case you need them. There were 4 different plots or 4 main plots against Elizabeth I's life. And the first task is going to be that you read through each one and you make a judgment as to how guilty Mary, Queen of Scots was. How much was her involvement in this plot? So you'd read through the Northern Rebellion, down to the arrow, how guilty do you think she was? You've then moved on to read about the Ridolfi plot. What you can see there is an arrow here in the middle which says how are these 2 plots linked, and what I'd like you to do in here is tell me any similarities between these 2 kind of plots. Again, when you get onto Throckmorton and Babington, you can see that there's an arrow here linking these 2. So a score out of 10 for how guilty what Mary was, then similarities across these 2 arrows, and then completing these 2 boxes at the bottom. Now you might need to make these boxes a bit bigger. I want you to find evidence that proves Mary was guilty and mitigating evidence or things that could prove Mary was innocent or perhaps not as involved as might first appear. There's just the summary of the instructions on this sheet here in case you do need them. And then the last task for today, before we write it up next lesson, is we are going to go back to this interpretation. So this is the same interpretation from the beginning of this lesson that we also used last lesson. And I want you to think about what the interpretation tells us. So not what you've learned from the previous sheet. We're going to put that to one side for a second because we're going to next lesson look at that and match it up to the interpretation. But from the information in the box, does it suggest that Mary should have been executed for treason? You're going for yes or no, and I would like some evidence. Mine mapped off this, so just an arrow coming off and then a little bit of evidence. If you think no, tell me why, or if you think yes, from the interpretation she should have been, a little bit of explanation as to why there. That should then be handed into teams today under assignments, and that is the end of your lesson.